So first of all, thank you to all of the ROAR participants throughout the last year and even the prior. I wasn't in all of them the prior year, but all of this starts for me years and years ago, in that I wanted to, and this was when the term active learning wasn't really a thing. But the chalk and talk never felt comfortable because I felt like the students weren't inspired or engaging in their own learning process. So back, Laura and I were working in Seattle, and I actually wrote a large primer on how to use selected response questions to measure higher order learning. And this was 14, 15, 16 years ago. I don't know, a lot of years, no, maybe not that many, but a long time ago. And everything has just developed in time since then. So I'm presenting on how to create agency in large STEM courses and how to engage students through active learning, circular assessment, and giving them freedom to choose. A little caveat, I'm very distracted at the moment. My stepfather has entered hospice as of this morning, so I'm very disjointed in where I'm at. Sorry. Thank you. One thing that I learned during COVID is that having people's names matters. And it's something that quite a few years ago, to be quite honest, I gave up. Like, there's no way that I can learn 180 names. I have students today, my student Benji, who literally served me my Starbucks this morning. He's like, "Hey, Professor Hicks." I'm like, "Oh, shit." You are a great guy. No, I'm very, very clear. Like, I apologize. I'm not good with names. What is it again? Benji. Oh, that's right. I saw you downtown. And then the connections start to hit, right? Putting names and faces together and creating a learning community is so vital. And one thing that I did from last year's ROAR program is I completely broke my syllabi. And the entire introduction is just what this learning community is going to be like. How we're going to create space and give everybody an open and respectful forum to learn and help each other learn in. And this is a big goal that is not easily achieved in a very vertical learning environment that economics and other STEM fields face. I'm a prereq, I'm a post-req, I'm in the middle, and there are certain processes that must be delivered through somewhat of a chalk and talk environment where I got to give examples, work through the math, and then make sure that they can do this again. So, but I start off trying to get them involved in that process rather than just being passive learners. So what you'll see on the slide is that I've been using some of our, forgot what the term is, the teal classrooms, but I forgot what teal, we just talked about how acronyms are.
Technology enhanced
assessment and learning, something along these lines.
Or lab.
Or lab, okay, yeah. So it's a really interesting environment to teach in that this is for classes of 90. I have 10 tables that seat 9 at each table. I stand in the middle. And I've actually been capturing myself through green screen to deliver all my content synchronously and live, both to those that are in the classroom and those that can't be at that time, because COVID changed our world. And we've heard from our students, and I know that we have had to be more nimble. And though the course is a required synchronous course in that you've got to be there, I don't demand that you are there in person. You can be there with me through Zoom. So one of the things that I do is by using this environment, they naturally form groups. And I start using those groups immediately. So we'll have a shared doc on Google Docs and tables 1 through 10, and then I'll have 2 or 3 Zoom rooms. We'll be actively building and learning about particular economic jargon, talking about language. I introduced this in my first lecture. I say, how many of you learned a foreign language? Everybody raises their hand generally. And I say, what did you learn on your first day in your Spanish class?
Me amo Sustini too. Well, in Econ 1, I'm giving you that basic jargon. In Econ 10, I'm building on that jargon. Econ 100, now we're writing sentences. Econ 126, now we're writing paragraphs. And I try and explicitly, engage my students by recognizing I'm not a master of this language even. I'm pretty damn good, but I'm not a master. And I'm going to learn from you, and we will learn through this community together. So active group learning. I manage the sizes very, very carefully. I manage the composition of these groups, making sure that I use pronouns to guide. There's always at least 2 people of any pronoun in any group, because that creates a safe space to have agency within these groups. Every group learning activity is structured, meaning that I have very specific goals that they need to work through, and I assign roles. They self-assign these roles, but someone will be the note taker, someone will be the presenter along these lines to make sure that this is actually, it's not just go into the Zoom breakout room. Good luck. Because we know that does not work. So flexibility in delivery and assessment. I do all of my notes through a program called OneNote that are digitally captured and permanently stored and delivered through our LMS to the students where they can access this at any time. Anti-racist pedagogy is just straight good pedagogy. Making sure that those that are working a second job, that have an illness in the family or are a caregiver themselves, that they don't have to be there at every single moment. Or if they are there, they might be distracted. I can certainly empathize with that at this moment. Making sure that they have all of these resources always available is critical.
Can I ask?
Yeah, please.
Did you pay that out of pocket, or?
It's all free. It's all through
OneNote
yeah, OneNote is already part of the Microsoft Office package.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is called Class Notebook. I actually have students, they have their names here. They can see the lectures. All my lectures are dated, so they can all see all of this stuff. On the assessments, I do selected response, but I also let them choose their own adventure. So there's different formats and different focuses of the tests. So if maybe they feel a little bit more strong on a particular set, they can actually opt into that. There are certain parts of the exam that everybody has to pass uniformly, but then there are sections where they can jump off. So this creates advocacy or creates agency. All of my content is recorded, and then it actually is captioned. So this is all permanently available to the students. Again, trying to create a space where if for some reason you can't be there today, or you tested positive and you're not going to be able to come in for a few days, you're still actively participating in the course. It doesn't just drop you. So accountability, active reflection, and reactive teaching. So something that I learned many years ago as a grad student is that this is a circular assessment for me as well as for them. And there's a lot of powerful tools. I like technology, but I don't like technology for technology's sake. If and only if it benefits the students do I keep it and adopt it. So I use word clouds a lot. And this is all free. It's through literally a website that most of your students have been using since they were in grade school called Kahoot. And you just set it up and you just build word clouds. It's fantastic. And I can have them reflect. So what is something you could have done better? Studying. Woo! Mind blown, right? Attendance, everything. Go to office hours. We've heard our undergrads talk about how powerful the office hours experience can be. And by the way, I call them student hours. Because it's not my office, I'm always in there for all hours. These are theirs. That's their time. So a little bit of flipping the paradigm. When delivering class, I poll at least 2, if not up to 5 or 6 times, and during every single class. So I can ask them, are you ready for this last new section of material on a scale of 1 to 7? 1, still really confused on Monopoly. 7, easy, let's go. And I immediately get feedback that at least 50% of the class isn't ready to move on. So it forces me to react as an instructor. I don't get to just go on with my plan because I'm about to lose half. So it causes me to reflect and on the fly, adjust what I'm gonna deliver. And when I first really started using active polling, it blew my mind how crappy the rhetorical, "Are you with me?" really is. So these are just some of the tools that I use. These are applicable in courses of 30, 90, 180, 360. And I use all of these tools in all of those courses. So I'm more than willing to chat with anyone about those. So there you go.
So forward, backward. The one that's worn a
Oh,
little
so
more
that's
is
it
the
right
forward
there.
one.
All right, fantastic. All right.
And those are our Zoom attendees, just have cameras off, but they're
Got it.
there.
And then right there.
Yeah, that's what they're
That's
saying.
where we are. All right, so I'm Susan Barnett. I'm very grateful to be here today as part of the second session with Justin and Eileen and all of you who are sharing and visiting and tuning in. So this session was like through daily interactions and how a class unfolds throughout a semester. And my classes are much smaller than Justin's classes. And so for this showcase, I'm actually using examples and strategies that I've used in many of my classes. But the examples pull most directly from a Spark seminar I teach called Intersections of Art and Science. And there are 24 students in that class. And so here we go. It works. All right, good. I work. I'm not always sure I work with these things. So in terms of anti-racist pedagogy, I'm really looking at liberatory and empowering practices for students and faculty. And I very intentionally put in the word faculty there because I have had to rethink and liberate my own paradigms and my own judgments toward whether or not I'm being a good teacher. And I've also had to empower myself to be someone who is practicing, not just a practitioner, alongside my students. And so it was brought up the idea that, do you show your students your mistakes? And I was laughing a few weeks ago, I was working on like a whole bunch of statements and I brought them into class and showed my writing 10 students who were working on research papers. And I'm like, you want to see what research looks like when you're like professor, to check this out. And I'm sticking out my tongue, but it's also very satisfying. And I also can tell them, listen, you're going to hit the wall, you're going to beat your head against it, you're going to be angry. And that's when you start shifting into a final product. So I have 3 acts for you. Intellectual Graffiti Act 1, which is developing presentation criteria. Intellectual Graffiti Act 2, student framed Q&A to engage a major assignment. And Intellectual Graffiti Act 3, liberatory notes and participation. So going into Act 1. In the background here, you see part of the board. You also see a student who's incognito. This student volunteered to be our graffiti artist. What we had done, we were planning on creating multimodal presentations, and the presentations are given via any way the students want to record them, but they're recorded. And so we look at a lot of TED Talks, and the students got in teams, and the students themselves in teams came up with categories of what they found exceptionally riveting in a TED Talk. And so, and also what didn't work for them, but this is the riveting stuff, okay? So this was, having a student write it out instead of having me write it out, having the student prod the students for other ideas or what else. And of course, you can probably tell just by my nature, I also got involved because I couldn't help myself. But sometimes what I did is I joined student groups and got to share, well, I thought this was kind of cheesy in this TED Talk, but I liked this. And so I got to have a little bit of role reversal. So then this is the actual rubric we drafted from that discussion. And along all of these lines, we then down here, you can see we use it holistically, right? So a scale of 1 to 5, not used, 5 used impressively. And so we tested their drafts with this rubric. And then I didn't include the final rubric, but we ended up combining 5, which is connects with the audience personally, with number 2, engages the audience, so that we had 5 simple categories, because 6 also seemed to be a weirder number. And so we had 5 very clear categories, and all of these areas, these topics, were areas that the students themselves came up with. So they also knew what they were creating as they were developing their talks. And so it also freed them up to deal with their research, because the research was really rigorous for them in many cases. So Intellectual Graffiti Act 2, student framed Q&A to engage in assignment. And this assignment was part of their research projects over the semester. It was an annotated bibliography. You know, when Angela brought up how APA apologized for having, like, you know, basically a non-anti-racist structure or racist structure, you know, some of this relies on those systems of power as well. And so again, 2 student volunteers. One was what are your questions? The other student was, what are the answers? And one requirement that I made, I said, everybody in the class has to ask a question. And if your question's already on the board, we'll check it off. But we all have to understand that we all have problems. We all have questions. Whenever we do something new, we hit walls. And that is the way it is in the research world everywhere. And so these were the questions. And you can see over here, we wrote an 8 and a 2. So there were additional questions, people who had those questions. These were the ways the students wanted it to look. We took a picture, added it to cat courses, and there we were. And so it trained students that everybody has problems, everybody has answers, and we can do this collectively. Last but not least, Intellectual Graffiti Act 3, liberatory notes and participation. And on the right here, this is just a sample response from a student, and I know it's far too small for anybody to read, but I just wanted to include it just to give you an impression of the kinds of responses I got. And I did this in the fall, and then I duplicated it and improved upon it in the spring. And I always have students write responses to whatever it is they're reading, because I want them to come to class able to participate. If they haven't read, they can't participate. You know, and quite frankly, if they haven't read, I often find that they prevent others from being able to participate. And so everybody writes reflections. And in the past, I've had very scripted reflections. I've had completely write whatever you want reflections. And I wanted to take a different approach, and I got very, very nervous about it, because there's some little part of me that is a control freak. And so I still wanted to have some parameters, and I was afraid I wouldn't get, I wanted to use the word rigorous, but I see Sam over there in the corner, and I know that's a bad word. It's a 4-letter word. I wanted to get intentional responses. That's the word I'm actually looking for. And so just 3 areas. You have to address content. You don't have to say you're an expert at it. You could say, I don't get this at all, but explain to me what it is you don't get. Fascination, something that fascinates you about it. And if it doesn't fascinate you, find something that you at least would like to address. You know, something that bothers you, something you want answered. And then application. How can you apply this to your own research projects and methodologies? And so I got this kind of set of notes over and over and over again. And the students, especially with this fascination and application, those 2 areas, they were fabulous. And I wanted to read one of them aloud to you, because one student, like this chapter and then this chapter, this one, the student wrote, I don't know anything that's going on in this chapter. It's way too metaphorical, way too technical. And then the next one was, this was my favorite chapter in the whole book. It totally changed my whole perspective on research and life. You know, and so it freed them up to be able to be more genuine, engaged, instead of feeling like they had to parrot back to me what was said in the reading. And then these are the takeaway points. So at the very top on the right, I have the anti-racist pedagogy takeaway points. And these were areas that I really was thinking consciously, like, okay, how can I develop these as anti-racist approaches? And so engage intellectual dimensions as involved participants or co-producers of knowledge and testing that knowledge. Prize critical thinking and action with approaches, difficulties, and solutions. So that was Act 2. And then 3, capitalize on the unique strengths, backgrounds, perspectives students have as members of many communities, whether it is a disciplinary community, a socioeconomic community, a racial community, but to recognize that all of us are part of many communities. And so what I need students learn, some of these things are already have been in action forever, but like how to manage mess. That interactions like this are messier. And it creates mess sometimes in ways that we don't anticipate. And so we have to talk about managing the mess, communicating more frequently and intersectionally, providing space for process and acknowledging it as such, framing things, testing things, revising things, and making it transparent. And then don't fear answers or ideas produced outside traditional margins. That's something especially for me. Like sometimes I fear that, oh, this won't work. And sometimes it works gorgeously. And then product process pathways, I probably shouldn't have touched the screen, but I want to. So hence the graffiti. So anyway, controlled risk needs partners. The risk needs to be controlled. It needs to be safe in a way. And if I'm doing the risks myself, I feel often too vulnerable. If I'm asking a student or a very small percentage of the students to take risks in these areas, that is extremely vulnerable and difficult. But if we say, okay, we're a community of risk takers, you know, we value courage. And so we need to be partners in this. And how do we create that? And then excellence or mediocrity can arrive in unexpected ways. And so, you know, I get to be surprised at the ways in which excellence can be demonstrated. And I also can be surprised at the ways in which I think something might produce excellence and it's pure mediocrity. You know, and I, you know, and so, yeah, and I can do the same, both, right? Super talented that way. So anyway, so this was, you know, some of the findings, and I'm grateful to Ease for putting this together and allowing people like myself, all of us, to be part of this with our students. Oh, yeah, somebody just, I heard somebody like, yeah, I was freaking out when the provost was saying Boston. I was like, oh no, Boston's being mixed. So I'm just super grateful that we have Ease and we do have partners in these, and it shouldn't be a risk, but it often is. And a lot of times the risk is because we have such deep academic and cultural messaging surrounding what education is supposed to look like. So there you go.
Siloing. And I think that that's what's beautiful about this kind of a group, is that we're across so many different disciplines. So that's awesome. I'm also really struck by the motif so far today about if you trust students, they show up, and you know, all of that. So I am going to talk about my great good fortune, as Sam alluded to earlier, being a facilitator of the Anti-Racist Pedagogy series meant that I got to participate in all of the discussions of all of the cohorts and get triple inspired, I guess. And so I started thinking about redesigning a course a year ago, and you know how curriculum works and all of that. So it took a while to actually enable it into being, but I got to teach it this last spring. I want to talk about a class that has forever transformed the way I'm going to teach. So the question that really animated me was this one: what does student-centered actually mean? And I think the tone of my presentation today is going to feel a little confessional, and that's intentional, because this is what my classes used to look like. There was bright light. There was inviting music. It was exciting. Students had choices about which horse they got to sit on. But the course really revolved around the center pillar of the learning outcomes that I determined. I'm not so sure it was really student-centered, because student-centered looks like this. It's a joyride. You're screaming down the highway, destination unknown. You might
not even have your seatbelt on. It's risky, potentially dangerous. And this is what I tried to engage with this past spring. It was a journey. And just a little backwards context. As all of you know, because of the pandemic and everything going on in the world that's been alluded to already today, our students are shell-shocked. Our students are disconnected, depressed, and discouraged. And we have data on that, right, Laura? We have data to show this is not, this is nationwide, this is on our campus. And so I decided that I needed to design a course to help address these problems. It wasn't about the particular content of my course. It was that I wanted my students to feel something different. I wanted them to feel connected. I wanted them to feel cheerful. And I wanted them to feel courageous. Those were my learning outcomes. And there was some skill shit thrown in there, of course, but it was these that I was really focused on. So a new course was born, and it was intentionally designed to honor student voices and agency. And I centered it on the thing that had saved me, that had gotten me through the pandemic, and that was stand-up comedy. I have the good fortune of teaching writing, and so I could teach a class on writing and performing stand-up comedy. And so that is exactly what I did. So I had some elements of this class that were really easy for me to do, to create. I hijacked a traditional trope. So I had a new structure for this class. But hey, I had people who helped me think about that. I had Alejandro, who last year at EASE said that, hey, I'm going to hijack my engineering class and focus it on a social justice topic. We can do this sort of thing. I thank Paul Gibbons, who said, stand-up comedy sounds an awful lot like rhetoric. I'm like, okay, that sounds like rhetoric, but it's really just a fun, playful stand-up comedy class, right? I had new policies. I heard Briston last year at EASE talk about co-creating a rubric. And so I decided I'm going to have my students co-create the rubric for how they're going to have their stand-up comedy. It's all about audience, after all, how they're going to evaluate that. So I was inspired. I'd read a lot about these labor-based grading practices, et cetera, where you're going to hear more about that from Dave in just a minute. And so those were easy because I'm kind of a rebel. Sorry, Briston, there's your homage. But here's the one where I really struggled. New daily practice. I knew my students needed to build community. That meant working with each other in groups. But I hate group work. This was my messy process. This was my unlearning. This was my Agincourt. This was my battle, right? I'm uncomfortable with group work. My classes seemed really spontaneous, but they were actually carefully scripted, the merry-go-round, right? They were a lot of fun. Therefore, it's just real loose. No, it's not at all. And the journey for me really forced me to uncover some hidden beliefs I had about education. The first was that if I don't witness the learning, it's not happening. It's very instructor-centric, right? And false. Goofing off unproductive time is wasted time. And if students work in groups, they're going to just goof off, right? Neoplatonic Protestant work ethic training that goes back generations for me. This is contrary to my deep values. I love students. I trust them. I want them to take risks and to flourish and all of this stuff. But oh my God, I had these hidden beliefs. But here's the thing. They were totally rewarded by the fact that I consistently get very strong course evaluations. So the system itself was rewarding me for practices that actually weren't as good for students as they could have been. So we talk a lot about instructional systems, right? And how they can be, you know, oppressive and terrible and bad, but even our reward systems, when they work for us, can be oppressive and bad, as it turns out. So here's what I had to work on this spring in this messy and wonderful stand-up comedy class that I taught. I had to continuously monitor my own discomfort, my own unease with this new thing, and realize that just because I was uncomfortable with it was not a reason to not do it. I had to vigilantly remind myself of my commitment to those CLOs, connection, cheer, and courage. Those students are talking about their weekends. They're not goofing off. They're developing material for their stand-up routines, right? I had to be open to surprise, realizing that people learn best in community, and that includes me. And I won't go in, I could go into many examples. I'll just, a couple of things, including things like impromptu discussions. 2/3 of my students speak Spanish, and they peppered their stand-up routines with Spanish. And they were, we had these discussions about like, well, for non-Spanish speakers, do we have to be translating all of these phrases or not? And, well, I don't know, what do you all think, right? So it was really cool that these unplanned moments happened. This co-created rubric that I was really intentional about, thank you, also then led to these amazing discussions with my students, because they said, well, Campfield, you're using this rubric that we created, but there's some things that we want to be evaluated on, like, are we being courageous and taking risks? Are we confident or not? But the people who know how to evaluate that best are the people we've been working with in our writing groups all semester. They saw where we started this semester. You weren't into that story the whole time. We want to evaluate each other. So the evaluation using this rubric that they created was also something that they together evaluate each other with. So was the class a success? I don't have those numbers yet, right? Grades just were turned in yesterday. I don't have my my numeric course evaluations, but I have this. The Global Arts Showcase happened a couple weeks ago, and 1/3 of my students voluntarily decided to perform their stand-up in front of strangers at the showcase. And, so that was really amazing. That really showed a lot about their confidence, their growth. And at the end of the evening, and the universe rarely gives you gifts like this, so I just have to say, at the end of the evening, my students, I called them up to take their final bow, and they took to the microphone. They gave me the most moving tribute to my teaching I have ever gotten in my 25-year career teaching in college. They talked about how they emerged from the class stronger and better people than they started. They gave me flowers, they wrote a card, they sent me emails after the class. I don't need the numbers from my course evaluations. So this has profoundly changed the way I conceptualize myself as a teacher. I am not a carnival barker, come on, ride my merry-go-round. I am now a spotter. And this was a term that another colleague who has participated in the anti-racist pedagogy group pointed out to me, who he attended the showcase. And he said, you've really become a spotter for your students. The person in red is the spotter. A spotter provides support and guidance, lets the students make the leaps, tries to optimize keeping them safe with no guarantees. And that's what I got.
Questions for our folks?
Take that. I'll put it in the corner.
So you guys all, I heard you all talk about sort of students, like the entire class somehow collaborating on something with you all. Which is something that I want to do in my classes. One of the things that I fear is that when a student gives another student a comment or feedback or whatever on this collaborative project, it may first not be useful at all, but more worryingly, it may be disrespectful. How have you encountered that? How have you handled that?
I can speak to it in mine.
Okay.
So on my group projects, where they do have a portion of the grade for that being based upon peer review, I have fully anonymized forms that they self-rate and rate all of the members of their group. And then there's an open comment portion within their specific form. So that's how I approach it.
You do that every time?
Every group project.
Okay.
Yeah, so each course has a group project that's more of a culminating experience
Okay.
that you saw that these group tables,
Yeah.
have one or two groups working on. And because I have peer review as part of this process, having that self-defined rubric, that's how I approach it. And it's very good, very revealing. Yeah, that's how I've approached it.
I'm glad that you asked that because that's a really honest and real concern with students. And students don't always have the capacities to be excellent reviewers of all parts of a project. And so one of the things that I do in my classes, especially the writing classes, is, clearly I like writing on having people write on the board. I really think I wanted to be an artist or something. But and what we do is we spend part of a class period, and it's every semester I've done it, it's been totally worth it, where we create our class ethos regarding giving peer feedback. And we have a do's list and we have a don'ts list. And like we literally type it up and I put it on CAT courses. And we have a conversation, quite frankly, about, well, what do I do if I'm no good at giving this kind of feedback? And so we come up with strategies students can use in those cases. This isn't my area of expertise, but I would definitely have someone check this. I'd be concerned. I'm not sure these numbers are right. I'm not sure that this makes sense, And so we strategize because peer review is always part of the process. And the other thing too is occasionally somebody may, especially in larger classes where people might feel more anonymized, somebody may do something inappropriate, but I also, I have them submit all of their reviews so that I can skim through them or see them or something. Somebody says, this person says something, I can flag it and I can have conversations.
I also think modeling, right? And so in my class, we were looking at the stand-up comedy of professional comedians and then having class discussions and, giving those comedians feedback, right? And I was facilitating those discussions. So kind of talking about how that feedback can happen. And then when they were in their writing groups, giving each other feedback on the stuff they were workshopping, I would circulate around and and they were generally too nice, right? They were like, it was funny, it was good, it was good. And I'd say, we gotta funny that up. Come on, you missed an opportunity, right? What about saying this or doing that? And of course, maybe that was too instructor centric. I don't know, but I was trying to model how to respectfully push someone on their performance, right? So I think if you can provide scaffolded modeling and then opportunities to practice, it's better.
Thank you.
Well, I'm curious, I need to know more. I have to do my homework more on the collaborative, like rubric building or ground rules establishment, because being a bit myself a control freak, what I find very challenging is how to manage a situation. I mean, it feels like inevitably you're trying to create this consensus and group engagement, and yet you still have certain, I would inevitably have my own list of things that just needs to be on there and things that shouldn't be on there. And I would end up feeling like I'm in the horrible position of someone putting something out there and then kind of publicly saying, this is not. So I'm a little curious about the rubric and the, ground rules and things when you're opening it to the floor.
Yeah, Kristen had prepared me for that. So I had opened a Google Doc and allowed students to start brainstorming how they wanted to be evaluated for their final stand-up performances. No one touched the Google Doc other than me. So then we came into class and we covered a whiteboard with all of these dimensions of performance and writing and structure and all of this stuff. So it was a great review of everything we had learned all semester. So it was like the secret, like you're generating a rubric, but it was also reviewing everything that we had learned all semester. So I was already assessing who was saying what. And then one student said, well, isn't it about audience and content and delivery, which are the three tenets of rhetoric, which I never, it was like, okay, it's a rhetoric class, but and it was like, yeah, absolutely. So let's simplify. And so we got really messy and then we got really narrow. And it pretty much, it was a great rubric. And they wanted to add that special, courage and risk-taking and these invisible elements of their learning that they wanted, some kind of acknowledgement.
That's awesome. For that last part, if they wanted that.
I can add just something really fast. You're part of the community too. So I also participate. I add 1 or 2 bullet points. So if you have things that care matter to you, you can.
Yeah.
You can ask questions also. You can say, well, what about this? What about that? How would this work with that?
But I guess when you're blue sky and you're in the blue sky initial phase, you don't really have to try to attach judgments or values or things. You just kind of let it be really open.
And then
and
themes
try to-
emerge. Themes emerge.
I have a quick question for Justin. Over the years, I have enjoyed overhearing students talk about your courses and how, because the slides are posted, they have a lot of feels like a safety net that they can re-review them. So my question is really, the Teal Labs are awesome, but I know you've been doing this a long time. So I guess it's kind of a twofold question. It's one, what would you say to people like the old school, instructional paradigm type professors who would say, oh, you're posting all your slides. What's the motivation for them to go, right? And then 2, how were you able to capture this prior to the Teal Labs? Some of these active learning strategies.
So the primary thing that I'll do the second part first. The primary thing that the Teal Lab has given me is natural group creation at these tables, which is amazing. In some of the larger classrooms here on campus, they are simply not conducive for that. It's really in our largest lecture hall, Cobb 5, Cobb 102, 105. I'm going to be honest, it's damn near impossible to have active group learning in that environment unless you do it through online portals, like Google Groups, or Google Sheets. The active learning modules and like how I've been doing that, active polling and using technology to keep everybody engaged, that's something I've been slowly developing over a decade that has been delivered in every class. Katie Winder, who was one of my mentors here back in 2006, she and I were beta testers for using clickers in the classroom. Anonymized polling gives voice, right? In the hectic moment, I kind of forgot, why am I here? Anti-racist pedagogy, right? I think of RBG and, if you're quiet in the face of, racism, you are part of the oppressive, force. Or I read Karl Popper, tolerance and intolerance and all of these things. And then I think you had mentioned Mr. Floyd. These are things that made it so that I could no longer just do my job. I had to do something to change my environment to give underrepresented minorities actual equal access. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't come. See, participation is 25 to 40% of my class grade. And I objectively measure that through polling. They have to poll. And they have to poll 75% of the polls in any given day to get credit for that day. Now, it's an in or out. You don't even have to really have paid attention. You got to just click the damn thing when I've said click, okay? But that means that they are there, they are present. You may be distracted, it may not be amazing that day, but it's routine, it's every time. And being a data guy, I've run the regressions. Active participation is directly reflected in the outcomes for the course, both informative and summative assessment. So getting butts in seats, which I think is what the old mantra you're thinking of, addressing that, I still address that. But I do it in a way that gives voice and agency rather than is sublimating them in the classroom. So I think it flips the paradigm.
So that answered a question about because of the great challenge, which was in that op-ed in the New York Times of this year of people just not. I mean, it's hard to do active learning with black squares on Zoom, right? And so you must have faced that dropout factor. And didn't that disrupt your active learning plans for group projects and things?
So I had, at the end of the course, I had 91% attendance rates. And I mandated that they have their video on.
You did?
Unless they opted out. So
Unless they opted out.
So if they give me an actual reason, and they don't have to be descriptive or detailed, but they have to ask to not have it on for a specific reason, and that was lecture by lecture. And that included this year for anyone that had to remote attend for some reason. Because the black screen doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're at time. That was awesome. Let's give everybody